Good afternoon. This is Joe Forward, legal writer for the State Bar of Wisconsin. And today I'm here with Jeff Glazer. Jeff is a clinical assistant professor at UW Law School's Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic. He's also an attorney with Ogden Glazer and Schaefer. And today he's going to talk to us about co-op law. He was a recent panelist on a seminar sponsored by State Bar of Wisconsin Pinnacle called Working with Cooperatives in Wisconsin. And so he's going to talk a little bit about that today. Jeff, how you doing?
Doing great. Everything's great so far.
Okay. So, Jeff, in terms of co-op law, I think a lot of people may not even know what a co-op is in terms of its business formation and why a business may choose a co-op over other forms of business.
Yeah. Well, a co-op is just a type of entity that a business could choose to be. So just like a business could choose to be a C Corp or a limited liability company or a partnership, a cooperative is another type of entity that they could choose. And they would choose to do so because of the specific rules around how co-ops work. And there are really two main things that we worry about when we're talking about co-ops. The first is the right of participation, and the second is sort of a right of governance. And so in the participation, the expectation of profits from a participant or a quote owner or member of a cooperative is that they participate in the profits of the cooperative to the extent of their participation in the cooperative itself. So in the example of a retail cooperative, like a grocery store, for example, if I'm a member of that grocery store, at the end of the year, I get a check representing my proportion of the share of profits of my total use of the cooperative. So the more I use the cooperative, the more I get back at the end of the year is my share of the profits for participating in the cooperative. The second major piece about cooperatives is related to governance. And the governance piece just says each member gets one vote, regardless of how much money you've put into the cooperative, regardless of the amount that you've participated in the cooperative, each member gets one vote. And the members vote on all of the issues related to the governance of the cooperative.
Okay. And so you mentioned grocery stores. I think a lot of people see a lot of grocery stores as co-ops in Wisconsin. Are there other forms of industry or business that are well suited for cooperatives? And
yeah, absolutely. We see that there tend to be a few major groups of cooperatives. Retail cooperatives certainly being one, right? Grocery stores are probably the most obvious example, but REI, the outdoor equipment retailer, is a cooperative as well. So there are other kinds of retail cooperatives that exist. That is one major type of cooperative. Another major type that we in Wisconsin are all really familiar with is the agricultural cooperative. So these are commodity producers or non-commodity producers that are sort of banded together in order to create some economies for the sale of their product. So if you think about milk and dairy or cheese, there are cheese cooperatives and milk cooperatives and grain cooperatives. So agricultural cooperatives are sort of another major type. Third major type are worker cooperatives. So this is where workers who are in a particular industry band together to provide their services under a common name. So for example, here in Madison, there's an engineering cooperative, which is a bunch of engineers who all work together under the same name. But as projects come into the cooperative, as each engineer works on the project, that's their participation in the cooperative. So they share in the profits of their worker cooperative to the extent they do work that is brought into the cooperative. And then the fourth major kind of cooperative that we see are utility cooperatives. So gas, electric, telecommunications. Broadband is a huge one that's becoming very active right now, because rural communities, which have community members that are familiar with the cooperative form, are looking at the use of cooperatives in helping to take advantage of infrastructure, but to provide services related to that utility, in this case broadband, in their local community if there aren't other major utility providers for that service. So those are the four major types. There are some other minor types of cooperatives. So for example, we see marketing cooperatives of companies that all band together to market under one name, or to buy advertising or market it or whatever under their own name. There are a few other sort of specialties as well, with nonprofits getting together. There's lots of different kinds. Those are sort of our four major ones, though.
So in terms of, the panel discussion on the legal issues that come up when discussing cooperatives, what are some of the things that the panel talked about?
Yeah, so I think the major concerns that came up on the panel that people are things that people need to think about when they're forming cooperatives. One of the major things that I don't want to touch on today is sort of the tax implications of cooperatives. They do have some, they can get kind of weird from a tax perspective sometimes. But the two major things that I think people really need to think about in terms of forming a cooperative is, first, how well do they align with the principles of being a cooperative? And this gets at the, are they ready to integrate from a corporate governance perspective this idea of participation by the members in the profits of the company, and the one person, one vote, right? A lot of times, particularly in for-profit institutions, the person that puts the most money in thinks that they should have the most say. And that's just not how cooperatives work. And so if that's the environment that you think you should govern your business by, cooperatives maybe aren't the right tool for you. But if you are able and willing to buy into this egalitarian governance principle, then cooperatives are really, really helpful, because all of that is just baked into the kind of entity that you are. So that's sort of the first thing that we want to make sure that people get on board with when they're deciding to be a cooperative. The second major thing is, how are you going to fund? How are you going to capitalize the business itself? One of the drawbacks of a cooperative is that because you don't participate in the profits to the extent that you have contributed capital to the company, like you do in the case of a corporation or an LLC, right? You don't participate in a cooperative to the extent you contribute capital, but only to the extent that you use the cooperative. So the incentive in cooperatives is not to provide capital, but to use it. So how do you get capital into the cooperative? Who's going to put up that money? Is it going to be a large loan from an individual or from a banking institution? Are there going to be grants involved? How are you going to capitalize the company? And that can be a really tricky piece too.
Okay. And then lastly, Jeff, I know there was some discussion about, cooperatives in rural parts of the state, and, their access to legal counsel because of, more retirements of older experienced lawyers in those areas. Is there an opportunity for younger lawyers to step in and learn about cooperative law and begin providing counsel to some clients in those rural areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So those at the state bar, those who know me in the things that I've talked about with the state bar, know that one thing I'm really passionate about is a problem that we're experiencing here in the state generally, which is that attorneys in rural communities are just sort of aging out, and they're not being replaced by younger attorneys. And so that's sort of a macro problem that we're dealing with. A few years ago, as part of our work with the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic, the UW Center for Cooperatives came to us and said, hey, we're seeing this problem in a specific context too, that there are very few lawyers in the state who understand cooperative law. And those that do are retiring. And we are now today at a point where there's basically no lawyers in the state of Wisconsin who really generally understand cooperatives really well, or at least none that the UW Center for Cooperatives are aware of. So if that's you and they don't know about you, you should get a hold of them. But they came to us and asked, is there a way to solve this problem? Because you're training young lawyers. And we said, yeah, that's a great idea. And so as part of a broader program that we have at the Law and Entrepreneurship Clinic called the Rural Entrepreneurship Project, one of our goals is to increase education in issues that are really important for rural communities. And agricultural cooperatives, worker cooperatives, and broadband/utility cooperatives are super important to our rural communities. So the more education we can provide for lawyers in those communities, the better those lawyers can support their communities.
Jeff, thanks so much for speaking with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. I really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Thanks. You too.